Stand up. I need your ID.
What's the legal reason you need my ID?
There was a complaint. Do what I'm telling you.
A complaint about what crime?
Last time. Stand up and come outside with me.
My name is Malcolm Reed. I'm a federal judge.
That doesn't matter. Stand up.
The situation started inside a downtown cafe and ended in a federal case because everything was recorded. It began mid-conflict. A local police officer stood over a black man sitting alone, demanded identification, and told him to stand up. The man stayed seated, kept his hands visible, and asked the only questions that mattered: whether he was being detained and what the legal reason was. The officer didn't give a clear legal reason. He kept pressing like the demand was enough by itself. The room got quiet fast. People weren't even pretending it was normal anymore. Quick pause. Comment where you're watching from, country or state. And if you like stories where power gets checked by video, paperwork, and real consequences, hit like and subscribe. Now rewind to how it started. It was a weekday morning at Harbor and Stone, one of those downtown cafes that stayed busy from open to lunch. People came in for coffee, sat with laptops, took meetings in low voices. It wasn't chaotic, it was routine. The cafe had security cameras pointed at the entrance, counter, and seating area. The manager, Alyssa Park, liked clean operations and clean records. She ran the place like a system because that's how you avoid problems. Malcolm Reed walked in like a regular customer. Plain jacket, no suit, no badge, no sign of status. He ordered black coffee and sat near the window with a book. Nobody in the cafe knew he was a federal judge. He wasn't carrying himself like he wanted attention. He was off duty and staying off the radar on purpose. Outside, Officer Brent Kessler was working a downtown patrol shift, not an emergency response, not a call that required speed. It was the type of patrol where officers look for something. Stops, contacts, IDs, questions. Activity that looks good in numbers. Kessler entered the cafe with his body camera running. He didn't stop at the counter. He didn't ask staff if there was an issue. He scanned the room and walked straight to Reed. From the start, he approached like Reed was already a problem. He stood too close to the table and angled his body to control the space. Customers noticed because it wasn't a casual check-in. It looked like the beginning of a removal. Kessler told Reed there had been a complaint about a suspicious person sitting in the cafe. He demanded identification and acted like it was required. He didn't explain what crime was being investigated. He didn't give a description Reed supposedly matched. He used vague wording that gave him room to change his story later. Reed stayed calm and kept it simple. He didn't argue back and forth. He asked if he was being detained. He asked what the legal basis was for the ID demand. He asked if he was free to keep sitting there. Kessler didn't answer directly. He repeated the demand, then tightened his tone. The problem for Kessler was that Reed wasn't panicking and wasn't performing fear. He was responding like someone who knew the rules and needed the officer to state them. That alone made Kessler escalate. Alyssa, the manager, noticed immediately because she watched the room for trouble. She walked over and asked what was going on. She told Kessler the staff hadn't called on Reed. She also mentioned the cafe had security cameras. Kessler dismissed her and told her to step back. He treated it like the cafe was a stage he controlled, not a business he was entering. That changed the dynamic because now it wasn't just Reed and Kessler. Now there was staff, customers, and multiple recordings. Reed continued staying steady. He kept his hands visible. He stayed seated. He asked for the officer's name and badge number. He asked again if he was being detained and why. Kessler started building reasons on the fly. He implied Reed was not cooperating. He hinted that refusal itself was suspicious. He framed basic questions as attitude. He didn't lock into one clear justification because he didn't have one. Reed didn't reveal who he was. He didn't pull rank. He didn't try to embarrass the officer in front of the cafe. He let the officer talk and push because every extra step without legal cause made the record stronger. And that's why this incident didn't disappear like most do, because Kessler had a body camera running. The cafe had security footage from multiple angles, and Reed wasn't trying to win the moment. He was letting the officer create a trail. After Kessler planted himself at Reed's table, he stopped acting like he was checking on a complaint and started acting like he was running a removal. He kept ordering Reed to stand up and go outside with him. Reed stayed seated and kept the same calm pattern, hands visible, voice level, asking if he was being detained and what crime was being investigated. Kessler didn't lock into one reason. He stayed vague on purpose. He leaned on suspicious and treated Reed's questions like the problem. You could see it happening in real time. The officer wanted compliance first, and he was trying to invent a clean explanation after. Alyssa, the manager, came back over because it was obvious this was getting worse, not better. She told Kessler the staff hadn't requested police help and Reed wasn't causing an issue. She also pointed out the cafe had cameras. Kessler brushed her off and told her to back up. That wasn't a small detail. It showed he wasn't there to resolve something for the business. He was there to control Reed. Customers started paying closer attention. Not because Reed was loud, he wasn't. It was because Kessler was making it a scene. People recognized the pattern. Officer leaning in, demanding ID, pushing movement, then getting irritated when the person didn't fold. Kessler tried a new angle and acted like Reed had to step outside right now. Reed didn't move. He asked whether it was an order and what authority it was under. That's when Kessler started talking like Reed was refusing lawful commands, even though he still hadn't stated a clear lawful basis for detaining him. Then Kessler made it personal in a coded way. He implied Reed didn't belong there and treated Reed's calm, informed responses as suspicious. It wasn't a slur, but it was the kind of line that tells everyone exactly what's driving the stop. Right after that, Kessler put hands on Reed. He grabbed Reed's wrist and tried to pull his arm back like he was moving into restraints. Reed didn't swing, shove, or jump up. He stayed controlled and didn't give Kessler anything that could later be labeled as aggression. He kept repeating the same questions and kept his posture steady. That moment was captured from 3 angles that mattered. Kessler's body camera, which recorded the officer's own words and shifting explanations. The cafe's security cameras, which showed the full scene and who was escalating. At least one customer recording quietly from nearby, which added an independent view in case anything went missing later. Alyssa stopped trying to debate Kessler and switched to documentation. She had staff call for a supervisor. She also pulled up the camera system at the counter and made sure the time window was locked in her head. She was already thinking about preserving video, even if she didn't say it like that. When Sergeant Holbrook arrived, the tone changed slightly, but not because the situation was suddenly legal. It changed because the department didn't want this getting worse in public. Kessler gave Holbrook a quick explanation that still didn't include a clear crime. He leaned on vague language and made Reed sound like the obstacle. Holbrook then spoke with Reed and got a short, factual account. Reed was sitting, Kessler demanded ID without stating a legal reason, and the interaction escalated when Reed asked basic detention questions. Holbrook tried to end it fast. She pushed for the easy outcome where Reed would just show ID and the officers could walk out, calling it a successful contact. Reed didn't take that exit. He stayed calm and kept the same line. He would follow lawful orders, but they needed to state the legal basis. Holbrook then tried another exit, asking Reed to leave the cafe to avoid further issues. Reed asked whether he was being ordered out and whether the business had asked for him to be removed. Alyssa answered clearly that Reed was welcome and not trespassed. That cut off one of the usual cover stories. At that point, Holbrook made the practical decision to stop the bleeding. She told Kessler to disengage. Kessler backed off, still acting like he was the one choosing to end it. Reed didn't argue, didn't lecture, didn't reveal who he was. He kept it procedural. He asked for names and badge numbers. He confirmed the body camera was recording. He asked how to request the incident report and related footage. Then Reed made the move that mattered most for what came later. He asked Alyssa in front of both officers to preserve the cafe's security footage from before Kessler entered until after he left, and to keep it secured. Alyssa agreed immediately. Kessler and Holbrook left. Reed stayed. He finished his coffee. Then he wrote down a clean timeline while it was still fresh. What Kessler claimed, what he demanded, how the reason kept shifting, when he put hands on Reed, and what the supervisor did when she arrived. Reed still didn't reveal his identity that day. He let the department think this would fade out like most complaints do, because the next part wasn't about the cafe anymore. It was about video reports and whether the officer's story could survive review. Reed didn't go online and rant. He didn't call a reporter. He handled it the way a case gets handled when you want consequences. The same day, he wrote down a clean timeline while it was fresh. When Kessler entered, what he claimed, when he demanded ID, when he tried to force Reed outside, when he put hands on him, and when Holbrook arrived and shut it down. Names, badge numbers, and the fact that multiple cameras captured it. Then he locked down the footage. He didn't rely on the police department to keep it safe. He worked directly with Alyssa. She exported the cafe video from multiple angles and saved it in more than one place. She also documented the time window and kept a basic record of who handled the file. Again, not dramatic, just enough that nobody could later say it was altered or not available. Reed also submitted formal preservation requests for the department side: body camera, dispatch logs, CAD notes, radio traffic, and the final report plus any edits. He did it in a way that created a paper trail. That matters because it prevents the usual excuse of, "It was overwritten," or "We didn't know you wanted it." About a week later, the department did what departments usually do first. They relied on the officer's written report. Kessler's report tried to make the stop look clean. It used broad language: suspicious behavior, refusal to identify, safety concerns, disturbance. It was written to justify everything after the fact. Then the video got pulled. Body camera showed the stop started with a demand for ID before Kessler could clearly explain a specific crime. It showed Kessler switching reasons as Reed kept asking the same basic legal questions. It also captured the coded line that revealed motive in the moment Kessler went hands-on. Then the cafe footage got compared to it. The cafe angle showed the whole room. Reed seated and calm, Kessler crowding him and raising the pressure, staff saying they hadn't called, and customers reacting only after Kessler escalated. The wide view also showed how Kessler tried to control the space and push Reed toward the door. Once you have that combo, body cam plus third-party security, there's no "he said, she said." It becomes sequence and proof. That's when this stopped being a normal internal complaint, because reviewers noticed something else. The paperwork started changing. A revised report version showed up with cleaner justification language than the first version. Small wording changes, but important ones. Written like someone realized video existed and tried to make the narrative match what the officer wished had happened. That raised a bigger question: who edited it, when, and why? And once that question exists, the review expands fast. Reed's identity still wasn't public, but the complaint landed where it mattered. Not because he was a judge, but because the evidence was strong and the handling looked suspicious. The case got referred beyond the local level. Federal civil rights investigators opened a review. They didn't start with politics, they started with patterns. They pulled Kessler's prior stops and checked for repeats. Stops based on vague, suspicious language. ID demands, without clear cause, stated reports describing non-compliance while video showed calm behavior. Repeated stops on the same type of people in the same areas. Similar wording across reports like it was copied and pasted. Then they widened to Kessler's unit. Same patterns showed up across multiple officers. Similar stop reasons, similar escalation points, similar report language, similar complaints that had been dismissed locally. The investigators also checked evidence handling and video integrity. They looked at upload times, access logs, missing segments, and whether footage was reviewed before reports were finalized. Because if a report is written like a script and the footage has gaps right where the script matters, that's not a mistake. That's misconduct. As the review widened, the local department tried to contain it. You always see the same move. Talk about training, talk about policy, talk about isolated incidents. But the federal team wasn't there for PR. They started interviewing people from previous stops. Some had never been believed. Some had taken pleas because fighting seemed impossible. Some had filed complaints and got ignored. Now investigators were matching their stories to video and paperwork. And once those cases got rechecked, the pattern became obvious. Stops without legal bases, pressure tactics, and reports written to justify whatever the officers decided to do. By the time subpoenas went out, Kessler's situation changed overnight. Now it wasn't a complaint. It was a federal inquiry with multiple incidents attached. And here's the key. At that stage, the worst thing an officer can do is try to fix evidence. Because the moment investigators see report manipulation, missing footage, or inconsistent file logs, it turns into criminal exposure, not just a policy violation. Kessler and his unit were now under that spotlight. Reed stayed quiet publicly and let the process work, because the story wasn't about one morning anymore. It was about how many mornings like that had been happening before anyone had the proof stacked this clean. Once the federal review widened past Reed's stop, the local department stopped treating it like a complaint and started treating it like damage control. Internal Affairs pulled Kessler off street work first. Then they suspended him. The unit he worked with got restricted too, because investigators weren't just looking at one incident anymore. They were looking at whether this was routine. Kessler tried to survive it the way people in that position often try, by sticking to the report and acting like the video could be explained away. But the problem was that there wasn't just one video. There was body camera footage showing shifting reasons and pressure tactics. There was cafe security footage showing the full scene and the fact Reed was calm and seated while Kessler escalated. There were witnesses. And then there was the paperwork trail, showing the report language changed after the fact. That last part is what turned a bad stop into criminal exposure. Because now the issue wasn't only the stop, it was the handling of evidence and official records. Federal prosecutors built the case around two big buckets. 1. Civil rights violations. They focused on unlawful detention and escalation without legal cause, and on using authority to pressure compliance without stating a valid basis. They treated Reed's case as the clearest example, but they didn't leave it at that. They connected it to other stops where the same patterns showed up. Vague suspicion, Idaho demands, escalating language, and then a report that turned it into non-compliance. 2. Evidence tampering, just falsification. This is where Kessler ran out of room. Investigators traced report edits, timing, and access. They compared report claims to what the video actually showed. They also looked at whether files were mishandled or whether details were added later to make actions look legal. At that point, the city's options narrowed. The department terminated Kessler. They tried to separate themselves from him publicly, but the federal case kept reaching back into the unit's history. People from older stops started getting calls. Some had cases reopened. Some had charges reviewed. Some had convictions questioned. Because if your stop practices are unconstitutional and your reporting is unreliable, the system can't pretend those cases are solid. When the case went to court, it wasn't presented as a viral moment. It was presented as a timeline. Here's what Kessler claimed. Here's what the camera captured. Here's what changed in the report. Here's the pattern across other stops. Here's what that pattern did to real people. Reed didn't center himself. He gave controlled testimony when required, stayed factual, and let the video do the work. The point wasn't that a judge was targeted. The point was that a citizen was targeted, and the only reason it couldn't be buried was because the citizen had the knowledge and discipline to document it correctly. The verdict and sentencing phase hit hard because it wasn't based on emotion. It was based on proof and repeat conduct. The judge in the criminal case treated it as a serious abuse of government power, not a bad day, not training issues, a willful pattern tied to falsified official actions. Kessler was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. That sentence became national news because it's rare to see that level of time given for this type of misconduct, especially when departments usually try to end these stories with resignations or quiet settlements. This one didn't end quietly because the evidence didn't leave room for a soft landing. Some cases connected to the unit were thrown out or reevaluated. Some people got their records corrected, some got settlements. The city paid, but the bigger cost was credibility. And Reed, he didn't do the victory lap. He went back to his life, and he kept the same approach that made the whole case possible. Calm, lawful, documented. He didn't win because he was powerful in the moment. He won because he refused to let power rewrite reality afterward. That's what made this a national example. Authority looks unstoppable when nobody checks it. It collapses when the facts are recorded, preserved, and reviewed by people who can't ignore them. Now, I want to ask you, if you were in that cafe, would you have recorded? Would you have spoken up as a witness? Or would you have stayed quiet and hoped it ended fast? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share the story with someone who needs it. And if you want more real accountability stories told clearly like this, make sure you like and subscribe.